Are you seeing a transfer of the B2C purchasing decisions that people are clearly making? Consumers are clearly shifting, perhaps not quite quickly enough, to environmentally less destructive decisions. But do you have any evidence or viewpoint on the shift in B2B of that movement? You know, the research that we've done and others have done suggest it's becoming much more important. But have you seen any evidence of that in the work that you've been doing in the organisations you've been collaborating with?
Well, ultimately, what we're trying to get to is a systems transformation. So, you know, whether it's sustainability or circular economy, no individual business can do it on their own. It's going to take a sector shift. It's going to take a shift across value chains, and therefore those B2B relationships are actually becoming more and more important. And we're seeing that actually in successful cases, it's moving from just that transaction-based agreement to much more kind of partnerships and quite radical partnerships we're seeing actually across the supply chain to help make that sort of systems transformation work. So an example of that is we're working with a small business called River Simple. They have developed a hydrogen fueled car, and they're leasing that car to their customers. So the customer would lease the car and just pay a fixed subscription for all of the finance associated with the tax and the fuel and the running of the vehicle. But then interestingly, River Simple are then extending that process back up their supply chain or value chain. So actually, not only would I then lease the car from River Simple would lease the hydrogen fuel cell from the manufacturer, who would then lease the fuel cell stacks, and they would then lease the platinum from the mining company. And that actually is a radical change in partnerships across that value chain for the better, because now no longer are each of those players interested in that individual transaction, but they're interested in maintaining those relationships and supplying the best, the most durable material or product across the duration of the vehicle, which is anticipated to be about 15 years. So we're really seeing complete changes in the way that businesses are having to work with each other. And they're really important. And actually, I'd say that the relationships between businesses in some examples are more important than that relationship with the end customer. It all needs to change at the end of the day.
Leasing platinum for a miner, that blows my mind. That just the idea that you can, through the whole value chain, do that. Gwen, can you talk to that a little bit? Like, are you seeing similar? Because banks so often sit at the core of these partnerships. I know you've always been a big promoter of partnerships between organisations. Have you seen examples like that too?
That one sounds really cool, but we've seen some examples of movement from traditional business models to something else. So if you're talking about, if I take voluntary carbon markets, for example, typically the ones that are out there are primarily like conservation, so REDD+, or forest management type projects. But more recently, you have a movement towards nature-based solutions, so towards afforestation and reforestation. And those projects tend to be harder because it takes a while for the trees to grow, so you can't get the offsets right away. And then there's this whole conversation about offsets to begin with. But typically, in the past, what people used to do was people used to just buy the land and secure that as an asset. But going forward, now what we're seeing is that there's certain kind of leasehold that people enter into for the owners of the land themselves, and the owner can potentially benefit as well from the carbon offsets that's coming out of his land. And then beyond that, really using technology on a lot of the monitoring. So you've heard a lot probably about all the satellite imagery and whatnot, but it actually triggers a whole chain, because first you'll have the satellite monitoring, but then afterwards you actually have to crunch through all that data. So you have AI coming in, doing the data analysis and whatnot. And then you have the actual physical monitoring, because you can't just trust drones, and you have people kind of linking apps onto their phone to take photos, take et cetera, whatever samples that need to be taken, and then that would then get fed back in. So that's kind of what came to my head.
Do you believe in this, either or both of you, in this notion that this is a fourth industrial revolution, that all of these industries are actually going to create this revolution in the way that we operate, and therefore it's an enormous economic opportunity as much as it's an existential threat? You know, there's clearly an argument trying to be sold that actually this is an enormous industrial opportunity. Do you see it that way, Fiona, or should we just be focused on making sure that we don't breach that 1.5 degrees?
No, I mean, I definitely see it as an opportunity, and that's why I'm so passionate and driven by the circular economy, because I think, as opposed to sustainability, which has traditionally been seen as kind of a stick to beat companies over the head with, you need to do less of this, actually the circular economy framework positions it as an innovation and an entrepreneurship opportunity. It's a way of creating new value opportunities for your business that ultimately then hopefully end up being better for the environment as well. But really we're seeing circular economy in a lot of the businesses we work with as a core strategy to how they innovate, how they grow, how they maintain that competitive advantage, as opposed to being just about using less energy and less materials.
I think you put a number on it, didn't you? Did you say $1.8 billion in your report? By 2030, just for Europe alone, the circular economy could be worth that much.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, it was the Ellen MacArthur Foundation report. Mm-hmm.
I mean, that on its own is slightly mind-blowing, but it probably could be 10 times that, right? If we really get it together and really make it work.
Definitely. And also, talking to Gwen's point about technology has got a key role to play within this. And the example I used before of River Simple, they're developing blockchain technology to govern and ensure that transparency between all of those different suppliers in the supply chain, because we're going to need completely new ways of interacting with each other, and technology can definitely provide a solution to that.
Absolutely. Gwen, fourth industrial revolution, are you a believer?
I am. It's just a matter of getting the equilibrium right. So getting it right would mean that sustainability factors just get embedded in there when you're trying to figure out if it's worth it to do the project or not. And it just becomes like another financial metric or accounting metric, or however you want, in order to make that right cost benefit analysis to say this is something that we need to go ahead with. So it's not necessarily detrimental to the 1.5 degrees, but is contributing to how it gets us there. And then at some point, whenever I get down about my job, because it's heavy and it kind of just, like Fiona said, does beat you in the stick sometimes, you say like, oh my God, it's such a like Sisyphus type project or challenge, right? Then I kind of feel like I'm in the matrix and they give you like the red pill and the blue pill. I'm like, which one am I going to take today?
Well said. Listen, I'm going to ask you one last big, totally unreasonable question, but it is on everybody's minds. It's on humanity's mind. The last IPCC report wasn't great reading, right? I mean, it just doesn't indicate that things are going in the right direction. There were a few more optimistic tones, but mostly it was pretty bleak. What do you think? By 2030, are we going to hit those Paris goals? Is it going to happen? What's your latest viewpoint as we sit here almost at the halfway point of 2022? Hard to believe saying those words out loud, but what do you think? It's a difficult thing to ask, but you're both working very closely on this every day, thank goodness. You must have a point of view. Fiona?
Oh, it's a really difficult question to answer, and I'm going to give you a bit of a politician's answer, because I think in some areas we are seeing a lot of progress. Some sectors, some businesses are really innovating in this space and are achieving radical things, developing radical solutions. But I think there are other incumbents and huge sectors that have massive problems, massive challenges, and to really get them to change is going to take an awful lot. And I don't think we'll see in its entirety those targets met by 2030, unfortunately. But I am positive, and I think we really need to share those cases of real excellence and innovation, and educate our workforce of the future to think differently and radically.
I think that's absolutely right. I think that case study sharing of what people are doing and the challenges that they've faced and the way that they've come through it and the talent that they've brought on to change things is already inspiring organisations. We've just got to increase the metabolic rate, haven't we? Gwen, final impossible question for you. What's your view? Are you a bull or a bear on this?
No, on a bad day, I think we're never going to get there. And then on a good day, if we're all rowing in the same direction, then yes, we'll get there. But every day I open my app to read the news, and it just depresses me because it's beyond, there's all the geopolitical tensions and whatnot. And then it sets us back, a few kilometers because energy crisis, energy sourcing, what does that mean for social unrest, etc. So I guess I would leave it as we really have no choice but to be optimistic about it. So I'm cautiously optimistic.
I like that. And I think what's clear is there is not a shred of space for complacency. It's one of the reasons we as a consulting company feel so passionate about helping organisations with this challenge, because it is the greatest existential threat we've ever faced. We've come through, at least it feels like we might have come through the pandemic, but we are still left with this challenge. And if it can create economic security, can create greater inclusion for people who've been excluded for decades, if not centuries, then we can come out of it positively for our children and our children's children. But I think I speak for everybody when I say thank goodness that two passionate professionals like you are working tirelessly on this. We know that there are good days and bad days, but we hope that the good days will become more and more frequent as the years go by, and that the bad days will be consigned to the history of the story of how humanity resolved this. I want to thank you both very, very much for being with us today. Fascinating talking to you. Best wishes in everything you're doing. Thanks very much for being part of this.